Hello, everybody. Welcome on down to Book Passages, Conversations with Authors. We're absolutely delighted to have you here today, and we're bringing to you Josiah Hesse and his newest book, Runner's High. Before we get to our author today properly, allow me to welcome you to Book Passages Conversations with Authors series. If you are a returning viewer here, well then welcome back. I'm very, very glad to see you again. And if you're new here, then allow me to introduce you to the series. Book Passage, as the name, is the name of both of our stores in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have been there for, I think, since the 70s at this point, for a very, very long time. And we host talks just like these at our bookstores nearly every day out of the week. And as we are now streaming on YouTube, in addition to starting to start up our in-person events, you can make you can make an effort to come out and see our stores if you happen to be in the Bay Area by going to bookpassage.com and signing up for our physical newsletter. Or if you cannot make it out to the physical store, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel below and click the little notification bell, and you'll be alerted every time we go live with these events. You might really find out, or you might really find an event that you really enjoy here. If you'd like to check out tonight's book, which is, again, Runner's High, you can find it at bookpassage.com or in the link in the description just below the video. Or you can find it, I'll probably link it in the chat to the right in just a little bit. If you additionally have any questions for tonight's speaker, make sure that you write them in the YouTube chat as well. That is the only way to get your questions there. I will be monitoring the chat, and I will ask them as they come up. Now, allow me to introduce Josiah Hesse. Who is an investigative journalist who covers breaking marijuana news as well as the intersection of marijuana and athletics, politics, economics, and culture. He has written for publications including Vice, The Guardian, Politico, and Esquire, and for cannabis-specific outlets such as my favorite thing I've never heard of before, The Ganjapreneur, High Times, Big Buds, The Fix, The Cannabist, and many, many more. He lives in Denver, Colorado, where I presume he comes from us today. And I'm really excited to bring the show off to him. In the conversation tonight, we were supposed to have, Joel Warner, but due to something just completely outside of his control, he is unable to attend today. So instead, you have me. I will be the moderator. I'll be asking questions and reading your questions in the chat. So without further ado, welcome, Josiah. It's nice to see you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, right off the top of everything, how many of these online events have you been doing? Are you familiar with how everything's been going, or are you new to the online conversation, the virtual events?
I've participated in a couple of them since the book's been out, and have watched a handful of them throughout the course of the pandemic, but not a whole lot. No, this is still somewhat of a novelty for me.
Oh, well, nice. Oh, I'm glad to. I hope you have we have a good conversation today. Let me just go right off the bat. Was it that inspired you to write this book? Your your personal journey or anything like that? Because
Mhm.
at least to my understanding, Runner's High, cannabis running. This seems really, really. I don't know, not niche, but like something that I've never heard of before, despite the fact that this seems really popular.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book. It was, I'll talk about my personal story in a second, but it was learning how popular the intersection of cannabis and athletics was that made me want to write this book. As a journalist, you often are, elbow to elbow with other journalists, trying to get a story that's your own, and everyone's after the same topic. I went through that a lot with like crime reporting if there'd be a mass shooting somewhere, or with politics, like when Trump was coming to town in 2016. But this was something that I didn't know anyone else who was covering it. I do now, but at the time when I first conceived of the book and wrote a handful of articles on the topic, it was completely ignored, or just unknown to the world of journalism. And discovering that the vast majority of professional athletes are using cannabis before, during, or after their training, and oftentimes in competition. It was extraordinary. But then also learning about the science behind it, our evolutionary reward system, which is what makes food, sleep, sex, these survival activities pleasurable. It includes exercise. There's a variety of reasons why most Americans seemingly don't enjoy exercise. I mean, based on the data of how often they do it, seems like the majority of people don't really like doing it, and they think of it as a chore, something to get over with. But it should excite our brains as much as salt, fat, or sugar, or orgasms, or vodka, or whatever. And that the mechanism that makes it pleasurable, that's part of our evolutionary system, is a neurotransmitter called anandamide, which is an endogenous cannabinoid. I know I'm throwing around a lot of sciencey terms there, but it's basically a type of cannabis that exists in our brains. And we have a variety of endogenous cannabinoids, just like we have endogenous opioids, like endorphins. Endorphin just means endogenous morphine. So it's a kind of cannabis that your brain produces that gives you a reduction in pain and an uplift in mood, and is what allowed our species to survive by hunting down antelope, running them down over vast distances. A lot of that's covered in the book Born to Run. They don't get into the pleasurable side of it, but they get into the mechanics of why we can run such long distances. So learning about that the organic runner's high, anyone who's felt a runner's high, is feeling something that's almost identical to a THC high. So you're getting what anyone smoking a joint at a Grateful Dead concert is getting through around 30 minutes of cardio. And so those two things, combined with my own personal story, were what really excited me about this topic. And I'll just, summarize that by saying like most people, never enjoyed exercise, never did it voluntarily. And I got into running when I was about 29 or 30, mostly for the mental health benefits, to help with depression and anxiety. Didn't enjoy it a whole lot. And this was around the same time that cannabis became legal recreationally in Denver. And with that, we had edibles. I know edibles have been around for a long time. Everyone's familiar with pot brownies, but those things were just crazy in the past. Like, they were so unreliable. People would always take way too much. I had several experiences of taking way too much. They were very unreliable. I mean, it'd be like drinking a cocktail and not knowing if it was 1% alcohol or 90% alcohol. I mean, you'd know by the taste, but imagine a world where you didn't know and you drank 3 of them before it really hit you. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm blacked out drunk. That would be insane. But with legalization, we had measurable dosed edibles. So I could take 10 milligrams, and that's my window, 10 to 20 milligrams of THC. And it's a perfect space to operate cardio in. Like, it gives you this energized lightness, this joy that makes the experience not only not painful, but very, very pleasurable. And so it became a centerpiece of my day. Every night I was going out running for years and years. And then that was what spawned me, meeting other athletes who were saying the same thing and finding out how popular it was and learning about the science. And then I was like, well, someone's got to write this book. And doesn't seem like anyone else is going to do it. So I'll give it a shot.
Did you, maybe you just said, but did you just learn about the science or the data behind how cannabis helps in exercise, or did you just sort of stumble across it and think, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah. I kind of told that story backwards. Like, those 3 things happened in the reverse order. When I first did it, I had the same experience that a lot of people did, where I thought I was the only one who did this. And I thought I thought it was like a strange thing that I was into, but nobody else really was. I did get the idea from the 1977 documentary Pumping Iron, which features a very young Arnold Schwarzenegger, then unknown. And at the end of it, after a big workout, they all smoke a joint, including Arnold. It's on YouTube. You can see it. And I remember thinking, like, oh, that's interesting. And I'd heard about bodybuilders using cannabis, and I thought, like, let's give it a shot with running. What do we have to lose? And turned out to be a complete game changer. And then that was what led to me investigating the science behind it and learning that there was just this whole magical world behind our eyes when it came to cannabis and running, or cannabis in any physical activity.
Wow, that's really interesting. Was there anything, because you've been reporting on this for a really long time, at least from what I've read.
Mhm.
Was there anything that particularly surprised you about in your reporting that you learned?
Well, the detail about the natural runner's high and cannabinoids really blew me away. Learning about the endocannabinoid system blew me away
Mm.
because this is something when I talk about anandamide and the runner's high, that's one of many, many functions that the endocannabinoid system regulates in the body. It's involved in sleep, appetite, fertility, immune system, mood. The National Institute of Health has said that there's almost no human bodily function or ailment that is impacted or regulated in some way by the endocannabinoid system.
Mm.
So this is huge. I mean, it's as important as the immune system in the human body. It's not discussed a whole lot, but this is settled science. I mean, there's a lot more to investigate about it, but its existence and its function throughout our bodies all day is pretty settled science. And it's one of the most exciting frontiers of human biology at the moment. So that surprised me, but then also learning how common it was in the world of sports because I had some stereotypes in my head about the type of people that were into sports and the type of people who played sports.
Yeah, sure.
I assumed they were all like homophobic meatheads, the guys that kicked my ass in high school, and assumed it was a very conservative world that just didn't have any tolerance for cannabis or any interest in it or any kind of sensibility for psychedelic drugs or creativity. But then learning that it's not only common, but it's the majority, at least according to the people that I spoke with for this book. And I spoke with quite a few people were putting it at like 80-90% of professional athletes, and they have various ways of getting around the drug test because up until recently it was banned in most sports and still is. I mean, I could talk all day about the different regulations and where they're at, but I was surprised that like whenever you turn on the NFL, the NBA, whatever on your TV, there's a good chance that a lot of those people are under the influence of cannabis, or at least were last night, or will be later that night.
Actually, not to swerve off of our conversation, but if we could talk about that for a little bit. Somebody in the chat, Bill Ford here, wants to know. I don't know how to say the name, but Sha'Carri Richardson being suspended from the
Yes.
Olympics for marijuana.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about that? He wants to know if it drove you crazy.
It was really upsetting, but it's this kind of ethical conundrum that I've run into as a freelance journalist a lot, especially when I was a crime reporter. As a freelance crime reporter, whenever something terrible would happen in the world, like a mass shooting or something, it would be great news for me because now it's time to go to work. I'm a freelancer, I need the work.
Mm.
So I'd have this like conflicting feeling of like, oh my God, this is a tragedy. This is horrible that these things are happening. And yet, hooray, we have work. We're going to get a paycheck. So it was like that with Sha'Carri, where I was like, she's this young star. I mean, she was a star before any of that happened. She was already in the news. She was breaking records and she had such a big personality. It was exciting to see her in the Olympics. And then when that news came down, it was just devastating. I mean, if you think about how hard these people work to get to the Olympics, and then just to have something so arbitrary keep them from attaining their goal. And she's young, she'll have another shot at it, but it was terrible for her. But really good for me because then suddenly the New York Times is calling me. The book wasn't even going to be out for a couple of months. I was in the middle of recording the audiobook for it when that news broke, and I had to step out of the audiobook recording to go do interviews on the subject. And it went from like when we first started pitching the book, editors didn't think that there was a book in it. They didn't think there would be enough material. They didn't think there'd be enough to talk about, or that it's some kind of novelty that nobody really cared about. And then suddenly, there's a whole lot of interest in it, and
Suddenly, the whole world cares.
yeah. But when it comes to her suspension and others, there have been many others this year alone that have had their careers, if not ruined, certainly stuttered because of these cannabis bans, because of the dirty urinalysis. There's this organization called the World Anti-Doping Agency,
Hmm.
and each branch of sports have their own regulations, but this is kind of an umbrella advisory board, but then also a regulatory board, and they have three criteria for a banned substance. One is that it's a performance enhancer, so it's going to make you, faster, stronger than the next person who's working just as hard as you are. The second is that it's detrimental to an athlete's health, and then third is it's very nebulous. It violates the spirit of the sport, and right, yeah,
Hmm.
that's exactly the look that I gave when I first read that. And in 2011, WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, put out this paper explaining why cannabis violates the spirit of the sport. And it really came down to athletes are role models for children, and cannabis sets a bad example for children. And so that's why it's banned. And they've talked about it being a performance enhancer, but there's no science showing that it'll take you beyond your natural limits. It's not going to make your muscles swell like a steroid would, or make your heart stronger in any way. It's going to return you to a state of balance. It's going to allow you to recover faster. Perhaps it's going to help melt away some of the ancillary chatter of being a professional athlete. The sponsorships, the management, the audience. And it's going to make you more in tune with your body. The mind body connection is going to has the potential to be strengthened by cannabis. It allows for a more present, playful mind state. There's all these different ways that it does help you,
Hmm.
but in terms of a performance enhancer, taking you beyond your natural limits, it's not going to do that. So I think what it really comes down to are those cultural attitudes that a lot of people still have about cannabis. There's a lot of people that are still living in Nancy Reagan's America when it comes to this issue.
Yeah. I mean, this to be like 100% clear, it doesn't seem, at least so far, it doesn't seem like cannabis has any sort of like doping like effects or any like steroidal type effects or anything like that. It's just something that's like, caffeine for waking you up. Well, I mean, obviously it doesn't have a caffeine like effect, but it's like on the measure of like other natural types of things.
You could argue that it has a caffeine-like effect because it can elevate your heart rate. It can energize you if you're using it correctly, in the right dosage,
Hmm.
with the right cannabinoids. It can energize you in a way, but caffeine isn't banned in professional sports. SSRIs, antidepressants, they're not banned in sports. Sleep aids aren't banned in professional sports.
Yeah.
Anti-inflammatories like Advil or aspirin or Tylenol aren't banned in sports.
Hmm.
And these are all, in the wheelhouse of the benefits that cannabis provides.
Sure, and then even in the opposite respect is like smoking or like hard alcohol banned in for like athletes looking up being looked up to by children.
No, and that is cruel irony to all of this. I don't think athletes should be role models for children anyway. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just insane that they do. I mean, after spending a few years with ultra marathon runners, these are people who run hundreds, sometimes thousands, like 1,000 miles. Like the whole Appalachian Trail.
Sure.
They put their bodies through harsher routines than Keith Richards ever did. Like it's a nightmare way to live. It's a crazy way to live. I mean, I like it, but I don't think you should encourage children to do it. I don't think it's healthy to run that distance.
Mm.
I don't think what these athletes do are necessarily healthy. A little bit of exercise is definitely healthy. Games are healthy. Playfulness is healthy. But at the professional elite level, you're taking it well beyond anything that's could be recommended by a doctor. So I don't know why these people are considered role models for children, or this behavior should be considered a model for children. But just one quick thing about alcohol. I didn't know this until the Sha'Carri Richardson debacle. There was reported that archers are not allowed to use alcohol in competition.
Huh.
I'd never heard of that in any other sport, but I guess it's something to do with steadying your hands. Which I would think you'd only need alcohol to steady your hands if you're an alcoholic. I don't know. I'm not weighing in on that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? That's one area that alcohol is banned.
All right, to wildly jump, Courtney Connell. Ooh, sorry about that. If you're in the chat still, of all the people that interviewed for your, of all the people you interviewed for your book, Whose story touched you the most?
How you doing, Courtney? It's a funny question.
An audience plant, I see.
Yeah, not on my part, but a lovely question none the least. Courtney's the wife of Brent Connell, who was featured as a character in one of the chapters. His section's titled "The Man Who Runs with Goats," and he was the brother of an old friend of mine. And this friend kept saying, like, you got. He was hearing about this book I was writing, or just about me running high. He's like, you got to meet my brother. He lives in an earth ship, and he goes running with dogs and goats, and he grows his own weed.
Wait,
And
sorry, what's an Earth ship?
oh, well, we could talk all day about that. I mean, it's basically a house that is made of recyclable materials and sort of lives harmoniously with the earth. It's sort of built into the earth and uses a lot of natural resources to power itself. So they use like a lot of sunlight to heat the house and to grow food. It's a magical place they've got out there. But Brent was a fascinating character. Aside from that, he was a veteran of the Iraq War who had some pretty severe PTSD symptoms when he came back, and through his own sort of experimentation, he found, and his story is something that I heard in many others as well. He found this sort of space with running like ultra distances, like 50, 100-mile races under the influence of cannabis. And that sort of gave him the space to process a lot of very difficult memories and emotions. And that's something, I'm not a combat veteran, but had a lot of mental health issues that I found the same kind of realm that I could enter with running, something meditative about the repetitiveness of your feet and the cannabis over long distances, where things that would otherwise seem overwhelming are you're able to process. And it's similar to other types of therapy like EMDR, which uses a kind of rhythmic hypnosis to get you into a place where you can process difficult memories. And I've heard from other people with traumatic childhoods that use cannabis running on trails, and it gives them this breathing room, where they're not like, when they think about that subject, they're not just like flooded with cortisol and, everything just shuts down. Their brain can like process emotions and memories in a much more secure way.
Hmm. Wow, that must have been a really really interesting story to get or to learn. Was it was it
It was.
was it more along the lines of hearing a story, sort of along the lines of something that you experienced yourself, or was it like was it interesting hearing something to step outside of your own experience?
Well, I mean, hearing from a combat veteran, who ran with goats on an Earth ship, that was definitely outside of my experience.
Sure enough.
But through the course of writing this book, I mean, I was just doing interview after interview for a couple of years, really just like harvesting as much material and characters and stories I could in these recordings. And then when I was writing the book, I would suddenly see these patterns emerge from the characters. And this happened since the book has come out. People approached me and said, like, everything you're talking about, that's my story as well.
Hmm.
And you realize that like we were all kind of doing the same thing, even if some of the ailments that we were treating may have been different, or our experiences may have been different. Our lifestyles or our approaches to running may be different. Like I love running with music, a lot of people don't. But that we were kind of stumbling upon something just almost by accident that had a pretty profound effect on us.
Well, I guess at this point, I'd like to remind everybody in the audience, as I'm certain there are a lot of new people that missed at the beginning. If you'd like to write a question to Josiah here, you can just put it over into the YouTube chat. It's on the right side of the screen or just below the screen, depending on where you're doing it. I am taking a look I am reading all of your questions as they go through, and I will do my best to ask them. But back to one of my questions. As your book points out, and I think as we talked about earlier in this there's like this contradiction between like the stoned athlete portraying people as slovenly. I hear about people having like the munchies and stuff like that and whatnot. Despite the fact that as you've said, it seems like there's like 80 or 90% of professional athletes use cannabis. What do you think that this where do you think that this like dichotomy comes from? And well, yeah, where do you think that this comes from?
I think with most things, most issues with the war on drugs, the root of it is racism. You know, if you look at Harry Anslinger, who was the first head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which became the DEA, he was the one that really ginned up a lot of the fear about cannabis. He was the one who gave us the word marijuana, really. It was like a slang term in Mexico that wasn't terribly popular. Cannabis had been the pharmaceutical term, and it had been used, you know, throughout history. It goes back about 2,500 years in medical texts to ancient China. We've been cultivating it for about 10,000 years, but it was in, I believe, like 1911, sometime in the teens, when he started. Actually, I think it was a little bit later than that. I know somebody out there is calling me on the dates, but anyway. He was one who ginned up a lot of fear around cannabis, and it applied this word marijuana. You know, you'd use it with an H because it just sounded insidious. It sounded Mexican. It sounded like foreign, and he used a lot of the fear of Mexican immigrants coming to America and taking your job. You know, kind of rhetoric. Well, you know, thank God that's over.
None of that happening anymore.
You know,
We're done.
or
We've moved on, America.
or black men attacking white women. He has these very horrible quotes. I won't repeat them now, but they're in the book about black men, you know, attacking and raping white women under the influence of marijuana. And he'd connect it with the jazz clubs. And so he was really like tapping into something that was already there, like this racist, xenophobic streak that was very prevalent in the early 20th century. And he really built the Federal Bureau of Narcotics around that fear, and got marijuana criminalized around, you know, by tapping into that issue. And it was later on, you know, at first he would say it made black men like superhuman, gave them superhuman strength. They could attack police officers, they could overpower people. And then like a decade later, when the Cold War rhetoric started coming up, he was saying that this was part of a communist infiltration to pacify Americans, that it made them lazy, it made them unambitious, it made them, you know, into strange art, you know, like jazz or abstract expressionism. And that was when we first started hearing about this idea that it made you lazy. And when the Reagan administration came around, you know, fast forwarding about 40 years, when he first ran for president in 1980, I think in his first speech, he said, marijuana is the most dangerous drug on the planet. And after a while, when the war on drugs really started getting ramped up in the Reagan administration, they were able to gin up a lot of fear of crack and heroin, but not so much with cannabis. And people were saying like, you know, these stoners, they don't really seem to be much of a threat. And so then the Partnership for Drug-Free America, which worked in conjunction with the US government and a lot of the media, you know, started thinking like, well, maybe we could use that. You know, we could use this idea that it does make, you know, these stoners are so harmless that they're completely useless. And if you go on YouTube, there are dozens of advertisements. So we've probably seen a lot of them about how cannabis makes you lazy, unattractive, unambitious. You know, the stoner sloth campaign that was going around New Zealand, I think it was like absolutely hilarious.
This is from like the drug-free Partnership for a Drug-Free America people, or is this just other new things that pop up?
There were new things that popped up. The partnership definitely did a lot of those, and a lot of that was funded by Big Pharma. You know, who you could argue did have something. Were threatened by cannabis. You know, people were using it as a replacement for pain medication or you know, inflammatories that affected their bottom line. You know, I don't think you can always make a sort of comprehensive conspiracy with a lot of these issues, or at least I'm not one to give that much credit to a lot of these organizations that they are so organized as to pull off that kind of conspiracy, but the incentives are there. And so they are going to fund these organizations that are demonizing their competition, which you never see anywhere else in capitalism. I mean, Coke can't say that Pepsi, gives you diarrhea and cancer, because they get sued for doing that. But you can do that with marijuana because, what industry is going to sue you for libel? But the data does not reflect the notion that stoners are lazy and eat terrible food and don't exercise. There was a lot of wonderful research coming out of CU Boulder about the exercise habits of people who use cannabis. Well, it started out just looking at exercise habits, and the survey went out to a bunch of legalized states, and they asked in the survey about exercise habits to use cannabis, and 80% of respondents said they used it before, during, or after their workouts. And I think they had around 800 respondents. I'm not sure about the numbers on that, but they did other research that showed that cannabis users have lower rates of obesity, lower rates of diabetes, better hip to waist ratio, lower rates of cancer. So the data shows that cannabis users are exercising, that they're eating well, that they have a healthier lifestyle. And subsequently, after legalization, we start seeing more and more respected people, respected members of society, sticking their head up and saying, "Oh, I've been using cannabis for years. I just didn't want to tell anybody because I could lose my job. You could lose your kids. You could have, the Child Protection Agency, come and potentially put your kids in foster care if they knew that you're using cannabis in their house." So, the only people who would stick their head up and say, like, "Yeah, I use cannabis every day," are the people that go to fish shows and read High Times. And I'm not putting that down. I mean, I'm a fan of fish, but that's where we get the stereotype of the dropout that uses cannabis. And it's the same thing we saw with gay culture, with anybody on the LGBTQ spectrum, that it was only people who were sort of on the fringes of society that were out, and there were so many people that were closeted. And then once we, gay marriage became more mainstream, we started seeing just sort of normal Walmart shopping, schlubby Americans, getting married, and we're like, oh, they're not these exotic creatures, that are so different from you and me. They're your neighbors. They're just normal parents going about their day and having all the challenges that normal parents do. And it's the same thing with people who consume cannabis. These stereotypes only can persist if the behavior or the demographic is forced underground, and then people can label them however they wish. But now that we have legalization, you have people like Drew Barrymore, who are saying, "I've been using cannabis my whole adult life."
Sure.
Or finding out that, like, Carl Sagan was using cannabis all the time for his whole life. He was working for NASA and testifying before Congress.
Is I mean, even further on this, where do you think that why do you think, there you go, we hear about so many cannabis users, or like, self-described stoners, talk about how cannabis makes them lazy, I would say. Do you think that these are just like, because certainly there's a cross section of people who it does, right? Because drugs have differing effects on everybody. But do you think that these are just the voices that happen to get pushed to the top by media or alternative media, or do you think it's these are just the voices that people happen to listen to? Is some sort of like what is it like? This is what they think. This is what they think is true, and so when they hear it, that's the thing. That's the only thing they remember. What do you make of that?
I think there's a few things going on there. One is that, yeah, that stereotype, any stereotype, you can find examples of people who fit it.
Sure.
There are, the stereotype of, that all gay men are, have rippled abs and are covered in glitter on pride parades, that person exists, but that doesn't encapsulate gay men to any extent, but there is a biphasic effect with cannabis, and that means, like, it's sort of, its effect is like a bell curve. At a certain point, it's going to give you energy, euphoria, reduce anxiety, increase coordination, and concentration, but there's a tipping point.
Hmm.
And when you consume things in large volumes, or certain things, it's the same thing with alcohol. There's a tipping point where you get the exact opposite effect. So you get paranoia, you get anxiety, you get lethargy, you get sleepiness. And some people desire the sleepiness and will actively pursue that, at a certain time of the day. But anyone who's drank alcohol before knows that if you have one or two glasses of wine, or one or two beers, you're jovial, you're having a good time, you love everyone around you. I mean, I know it's not the same for everyone, but you might, be in a great mood. Drink 2 or 3 bottles of wine, or a whole case of beer, and you could become a monster. You could be crying, you could be angry, you could be depressed. So I think so much of the conversation around cannabis needs to include dosage and how regularly you're using it. I mean, if people are taking dabs all day, and I think some people that's perfectly reasonable thing to do. If you have like terminal cancer, or you have some sort of severe mental illness, or I have no judgments on the volume. I think each person should make their own decision,
Sure.
and maybe speak with their physician about it as well. But for a lot of people, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is becoming a big thing, where people are having cyclical vomiting, that is very problematic. I don't think it's like, common in terms of cannabis users. I think it's a very small minority, but it is a problem. And I think a lot of that is a problem of this industry. We have an industry that's just catering toward party bros that want to get fucked up. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can curse on this interview.
This is a family shot. No, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
But here in Denver, we were kind of the first big industry. I know California legalized medical in the 90s, and Washington technically legalized at the same time that we did, but we became like the Vegas of cannabis pretty quickly, and the industry just started catering toward people that wanted to have a wild time, and they wanted high THC products, and that's all they cared about. They didn't care about any other terpenes, flavonoids, cannabinoids. They didn't care about any sort of spectrum of experience. They're like, get me messed up, and they take it with alcohol, like large volumes of alcohol, and that's just so problematic in a lot of ways. And I wish that didn't make people in the cannabis industry, that sort of commentary, like flinch, as it often does. They think like, oh, you're a prohibitionist now if you're criticizing the cannabis industry, if you're criticizing these products or these users. But people need to like educate themselves on what a reasonable dose for them is, and all the different ways that cannabis can affect you beyond just THC.
Actually, to this point, we have a question from the audience from Lydia Spencer, who says, I'm a relatively new lightweight. Do you have any tips or anything that you wish you would have known about safety running out in the world, safety near traffic through rough terrain? And I think for myself, or a question I'm interested in, do you have any resources on how people could learn about dosing? Anything past that just like trying and seeing what works? Any like websites or books that you would read, perhaps even yours?
Yeah, I do have a section at the end of the book. The reluctantly composed how-to chapter is how I titled it, and I use that title because it was my editor, my agent, who really wanted a how-to chapter. I don't like telling people what to do, but after we talked about it, I was like, you know what? I wish I did have some of this information when I first started out, and this is helpful information, important stuff, because there was a story of Maureen Dowd coming to Denver, the New York Times columnist, and eating like 10 times the recommended dose of an edible and just losing her mind in her hotel room. She wrote a column about it, and she's like, this is a nightmare of an industry, don't let it come to your town. And nobody told her, like nobody at the dispensary or anywhere said like, you just take a little bit of it, you don't eat the whole candy bar. And that's a problem with the industry, because people don't eat just a tiny piece of a candy bar. People don't take a sip of a soda and then put it away and sip it the next day. We need to have low dose products, and that is changing in the industry. But what I recommend for people is, low dose, and edibles are a great way to start. I recommend around 2.5 milligrams of THC. And I say 2.5 because a lot of times you can get 5 milligram products. And I say cut that in half, take 2.5, and stay at home. Don't go out and exercise. If you haven't exercised in a while, get used to that experience. Do a couple times at home. And same thing with exercise. If you're new to that, you don't have to go run a marathon. Go for a walk in the park. Do some light stretching. Go on YouTube. There's all sorts of great yoga videos, stretching, some introductions to aerobics, something where you can get just like a mild, elevated heart rate. And when it comes to trail running, something that I wish I'd really thought of or like been told is pay attention to your surroundings. I was a city runner for years and loved it, and still do it all the time. But I'm familiar with Denver. I know all the parks. I know every inch of the city, so I can run it at any hour of the day and be safe. But when I was introduced to trails, I hadn't spent much time in the outdoors. I thought the mountains were just for rich assholes in Aspen. And people started showing me all these great trails. And I loved it. I loved it so much that I just plopped my headphones on, took 20 milligrams and ran like 10 miles up in the mountains, and then turned around exhausted. And I was like, where am I? I didn't bring any water. I didn't bring any food. I lost my friends like an hour ago. I don't know. The signs are confusing. If you're not used to them, they're often very unclear. So do it in familiar settings. And if you're on trails, it's probably best to just not listen to music for many, many reasons. I love listening to music when I run, but yeah, take a moderate dose. And if you go to a dispensary, be honest with the bud tender, like, hey, I'm new to this. I want something that's mild. I want something that, I'm going to use for exercise or for sleep or whatever you might use it for. But tell them, and if you get a good one, I mean, maybe like 50% of them out there know what they're talking about. A lot of them are just, cashiers, basically. They're just there to ring up the product. But there's a lot of them out there that will tell you like, oh, you should try this one. This one will have a pretty mild effect on you. And you can always take more. That's the thing. Like you can't take less after you've already eaten it. So like take a moderate dose, wait an hour, see how you feel. You can take a little more if you want to take a little more, but experiment that way with just like a tiny ascent and familiar surroundings where you feel safe and at peace.
Well, I hope you got that, Lydia. And now I'm feeling like I can't believe where the time has gone. We only have 15 minutes left. But one last
Yeah.
time to everybody who's in the chat, if you have any questions, absolutely now's the time to ask. In fact, Catherine Tripp has a really, really excellent question that I'm really excited to ask you. And I almost want to save it for later, but I'm not going to. How do we... Well, her question is, how do we overcome the banking issue for dispensaries? But I think maybe a larger question is, how do you think we overcome like federal legalization? Or do you think there's a way around? Do you think that there's a way around this banking issue? Could you describe it for the people in the chat that may happen to be not in the know?
Yeah, I mean, the banking issue is really just like it extends in all economic directions of this industry, because because of federal criminalization, you can't get or it's very, very difficult to get any kind of bank loan, bank account. A lot of this is a cash business, and so there's been an industry of security companies that have done very well because of this conundrum, because they have to move tons of cash. But you also have businesses that are paying their taxes in like, boxes of cash. They're just sending boxes of cash to the IRS because they don't know how else are they going to do it.
Yeah, sure.
And there are some ways around it. There are credit unions that are beginning to work with the industry, but along the lines of taxes, you don't get any tax breaks as a cannabis business. Anyone who's ran a small business or any kind of business knows that you need tax breaks, you need tax credits to maintain a profit. But the cannabis industry don't have access to funding.
That must be the most thin margins ever then. That's crazy.
Well, yeah, and consequently, you have to be a millionaire several times over to get into this industry. I write in the book about a friend of mine, Kayvon Kalabari, who started his cannabis business with $4,000 and a half pound of weed in like 2006, 2005 or something, I forget. And he built it into, a huge business that he did very well for himself. He retired at 35. But today, if you want to start any sort of cannabis business, you need at least $1 million in the bank, and you need to be okay with not turning a profit for a year or two. And who could do that?
Yeah. Wow.
Well, the people who could do that fit a certain demographic. And it's certainly not the demographic of people who were persecuted by the war on drugs
Sure.
over the last century. So we have an industry that's just dominated by billionaire white men. It's very few people of color, very few women are, more and more women are getting in the industry, and that's fantastic. But so far, it's just follows. It's even worse than most industries in terms of demographics. So I think how we get around it is obviously federal legalization.
Sure.
What that looks like when that's happening, who knows? I think Chuck Schumer has a bill that's being considered right now. I don't know exactly where it's at, but he's made it a priority. I don't think it's going to pass. But if to go back to gay marriage, maybe for people who were following it closely, it didn't sneak up on them. But I think for a lot of America, that Supreme Court ruling kind of just like changed the whole game, almost like in a matter of days. We went from like, and not to say that gay people aren't still discriminated against, but like it changed everything, not everything, but like quite a bit, very, very quickly.
Sure.
And so I think cannabis federal legalization will probably have that same path where something gets approved, the bill passes and federal legalization is the law of the land, and that's going to change everything for this industry. There's going to be so much money flowing through this, and it's going to change the culture, it's going to change the laws, the economy, the science. Like that's going to be, and it's probably going to spread internationally after that as well. It already is to some degree, but it's going to probably sweep through Europe after that.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. Chatter John Bustos wanted just to remark that recently found out that Amazon's just full on dropped THC from their panel on drug testing.
As they should. A lot of people are doing that. There was a story years ago about the FBI trying to hire hackers, and they couldn't find any that could pass the drug tests for cannabis, and so they had to drop that. And I think you're seeing that. Well, just now, employers in general are having a hard time finding employees because they give them really shitty pay and benefits. And it's fantastic that workers are pushing back on this, and that employers have to make some adjustments. Drug tests have always been a violation of your civil liberties, in my opinion. I don't think it should be tied to businesses' insurance the way it is. I don't think it should be reasonable to ask someone what they do in their spare time, and that should be reflected in whether or not they could be hired for a job. So I think the job market's definitely catching up with this. We just need professional sports to catch up.
Hey, true enough. I guess at least we're sort of running up to the end of our time, but I would like to ask, what is it that you hope that readers, the people that read this book, and just the people that attended this this chat here, if there's anything you want them to take away from this, what would you say it is?
Well, the book in general, I think this underlying message is that exercise does not have to be a discipline. It does not have to be something that you push yourself through. It can be if you're working at an elite level. If you want to be a professional athlete, yeah, you got to get through some grueling shit to get there. But for most of us, this can be a hedonistic activity. This is part of our evolutionary reward system. This affects our dopamine levels and our serotonin levels. This endogenous cannabinoid we have in us, anandamide, which comes from the Sanskrit word for bliss, is something anyone can experience. And so if we can get out of this mindset that exercise is something you have to get over, that you have to do because your doctor told you to, your spouse told you to, you're gaining weight, you're going to die. If we can get out of that mindset and not think of it as something you're doing towards some end, but is an end in and of itself. I'm not running to live longer. I'm running to live now because it's a fun, playful thing to do that I'm going to do as soon as this interview is over. And, not because I have any end goal in mind. I don't like measuring, the pace of my runs or the distance. I mean, I do if I'm training for a race and I want to be, stronger, or I want to avoid injuries, and I do strength training and stretching, sometimes when I don't want to. But running or any kind of physical activity should be its own reward. And I think cannabis can midwife that experience.
Thanks. That's very well put. If there's anything else you'd like to say, anywhere we can find you, or anything other than the book that you want to shout out for us, or on here?
On Instagram at JoJoDancer3000. On Twitter at Josiah M. Hesse. Yeah,
Nice.
hit me up.
Sounds very good. I don't want to keep you from your run. To everybody who's still in the chat, thank you very much for coming today. This has been Conversations with Authors. I'm absolutely delighted for everybody that made it through to the end of the show. If you did happen to come in halfway through and you're thinking to yourself, oh no, I missed the first half of this, that's the beautiful, beautiful thing about YouTube. You can just go to the progress bar and just whip it all the way back to the beginning. Well, not exactly to the beginning. Skip the first 7 minutes or so. And you can watch this over again. You can learn all kinds of new things and interesting stuff. There was really, really cool conversation that we had at the beginning of this show as well. But other than that, if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the YouTube channel below. We do conversations like these online, at least, and somewhere between three to 5 days a week or so. I'm on here for about half of them, and my good colleague Zach is here on the other half. And if you would like to purchase the book, you can find the link to it just in the description below. You click it, it's like you write to bookpassage.com, where we can ship it to you just like every other online retailer, including that one big one that we daren't speak its name. But other than that, thank you one last time for coming out tonight, everybody. This has been Conversations with Authors. Thank you again for supporting us, and I really do, truthfully, hope to see you all in the next one. Bye.